The morning came and I still had a confident spring in my step. I even treated myself to a nice coffee on the way to work. I started doing that criminal thing that you do when you think you've had a good idea and let the fantasy run away with itself. After all, I just figured out how I was going to control that class. My head of year didn't know how to do that. Maybe this would lead to a promotion. Maybe I'd be next in line for the head of department. Maybe I could include it in the book I was going to write about controlling classrooms. And maybe I'd be invited on TV to explain how I'd turn this obnoxious class around. I knew I was getting way ahead of myself, but hey, it was a daydream for the commute. Where was the harm in letting it run a little? I got to my room and started setting up the equipment. They were going to be my first class of the day, so I wouldn't have to wait forever, which was lucky because at this point, I could barely contain myself. The equipment was very simple. There was going to be a simple speaker at the front of the classroom, which was going to be the focal point of the display. But in the back corners, there was going to be a setup of a couple metal plates held in front of electromagnets. They were all going to be set to the same subsonic frequency that Gavro had used, and I hoped the acoustics of the room would amplify the effect. The class piled in and took their places. They were already starting to play up, but a couple were disquieted by the calm, confident look on my face. There wasn't much that gave any of their teachers cause for that kind of collected facial expression in their classes. Most had a look of barely concealed fear and trepidation, so to see me looking like a Hindu cow shook their confidence. I had to capitalize on this brief period of crumbled bravado before they collected themselves. "Sound!" I bellowed. "What is it?" My question was met with stony silence, as most of my attempts to engage with them were. Sound is a form of energy that, for the most part, allows us to hear things. I subtly turned on the speakers to their subsonic frequency. It was at a low amplitude, so it's unlikely anyone would be perceiving anything yet. However, scientists are still discovering new ways that the body interacts with energy in all its forms. Every day we find out new mechanisms by which the body is sensitive to energy. Every day we find a new way to explain the unexplainable by using rigorous scientific method to observe, predict, experiment, and analyze. I tweaked the intensity up a few notches and saw a few of their bored expressions shift to one much less complacent. I was loving this, truly loving it. I almost didn't know whether I was getting an adrenaline rush from finally controlling this unruly class or whether the sound waves were starting to get to me too. There was a bubbling panic growing in my chest, but I was sure that was just down to the excitement of the position. Even if I was also being affected, no reason I wouldn't be, just because I was aware of it. At least I knew that I was in control. And if you kids really apply yourselves, really buckle down and stop giving me shit. I couldn't believe I'd just sworn at my class. The excitement was almost too much. Then maybe you'd be able to use science to achieve something. I paused and scanned over their increasingly distressed faces to ensure I really had them before I went for the grand finale. Really special. I cranked the intensity of the sound wave up to full. I saw an instant shift in their demeanor. It was beautiful. A few started crying, some hid their eyes, some were just frantically looking around, wondering if they were the only ones, and quickly seeing that they weren't. I almost started to scare myself. I looked across their terrified faces, watched them start scrambling and pleading with me and each other and God and anyone to make it stop. This started to feel more like revenge than science. Every crappy lesson, every fight, every interruption, every curse, every punch, and every missed piece of homework was all avenged as I watched the class descend into pure, terrified panic. Then there was a shift. I don't know why I'd been slower to respond, but all of a sudden the sound waves got to me. All of a sudden I saw what they were seeing, and I understood their fear. Shadowy figures swooped and darted around the peripheries of my vision. The corner of my eye was a dance of barely seen terrors. However, when one of the shadows appeared to dash right across the classroom, I realized I'd gone too far. This was terrifying even for me, and I knew none of it was real. This needed to stop, now, before it went any further. I killed the power to all the speakers. Instantly the room was back to normal. No figures, no shadows, nothing clawing at the extremities of your vision. Just another classroom full of clearly unsettled children. I regained control of myself and calmly explained to the class exactly what had happened. We went into detail about sound waves, energy transfer, the retina, the eye's lenses, the whole lot. I knew I'd way overstepped the mark, and I didn't want to send a single child out until I was sure they knew that this was all an illusion. There were no ghosts, no evil shadows, just a scientific trick of the mind. Most of the class had recovered by the time they needed to leave for their next lesson. A couple still shaken, but I was satisfied that all they needed was a bit of a sit-down. I'd certainly knocked them down a peg or two. Amazingly, Jake even looked me right in the eye and said, "Nice one," before moving on. I was in a better mood than I'd been in all year. I told the head of year, and he let out a laugh so loud and appreciative I was sure half the surrounding classes had heard. "God, I wish I'd been there," he chuckled. But then he put on his stern professional face and said, "But you really should run these kind of things past me first. If one of their parents complains—" He trailed off before looking at me again and letting his stern face break into another wide, appreciative grin. I stayed on cloud 9 until later that evening. Everything was fine until the sun went down and it started getting a bit dark. I could have sworn I saw another shadow dart into hiding out of the corner of my eye. The first time it happened, I was still full of bravado, thinking, "I know what caused that. It must be the road work down the street. The pneumatic drill must be vibrating my windows just right." At that point, I actually believed myself. However, as the light continued to fade, the twilight carried on playing tricks on me. I kept seeing dancing in the shadows long after the road crews had gone home. I tried just getting an early night, but I couldn't. As soon as I felt myself drifting off, I'd see more movement in the shadows. Hard as I tried, I kept seeing the darkness moving. They kept darting around. They darted towards, away, and around me. Sometimes they looked like they were just standing there. Other times, they looked like they were ready to jump on me. My imagination was driving me wild. I couldn't take it anymore. So I bottled out, turned on all the lights, and went on the internet. Unable to think of anything more constructive, I researched a bit more about Gavro's findings. Why didn't I do this before? Gavro's scientific studies had tapered away rather rapidly after his subsonic discovery. From what I could see, they were replaced with increasingly erratic and less reliable conjecture about the nature and power of the sounds and the shadows. Most of his academic companions deserted him as he got more and more unhinged. I remembered the power I felt manipulating the class, and I remembered having to tell myself that it was just an illusion. What if Gavro lost that grip on reality? What if he kept pushing it until he forgot the science and believed his own pranks? I was hardly comforted when I found out that his final conclusion from his final published research paper, widely discredited by all who found it, was that the sound didn't make you see ghosts. The sound let you see the ghosts that were already there, and they didn't appreciate being seen. I couldn't sleep a wink. It didn't look like any of my class did either when I saw them the next day. Saggy-eyed, drowsy, and yawning, I asked them what was up. "I kept seeing the shadows, sir," said one, and many murmured in agreement. Worse, though, was that one student hadn't turned up at all. Jake was absent. Not especially unusual. A lot of students played truant when given the chance. But something didn't sit right. I asked if any of the students had heard anything from him. One girl timidly replied, "He texted me last night, sir. Said he couldn't sleep. Said he needed to find a way to turn the sound off." I just hope he found it. I just hope he got some sleep. I hoped we all would.